Hello crafters, this is Mary Prasad, artist in residence with Imagine Crafts. In this video, I'll show you how to do some layered stamping with masks, as well as how to use Radiant Neon inks to color and blend. For this project, you'll need the following supplies listed on the screen. Once you have your paper cut down to your desired size, you're going to lay out the stamps kind of how you want it in your scene. I usually leave a little extra around the edges in case I don't get my images quite centered. I'm using several stamp sets from Stampers Anonymous, including the Cityscapes one, which I'll put in the background. To mask my images, I'm going to use Post-it removable labeling tape, although any type of masking paper will do. I decided to use StazOn ink in jet black because it's waterproof and dries quickly. You'll need to make masks for all the foreground images. You don't have to worry about any of the background images if nothing's going to get layered over the top of them. Cut just inside the image outline and cut off single line things like these feet. To make cutting easier, move the paper around rather than the scissors, and also cut off bigger pieces as you go. It's also easier if you isolate each stamped image before you start cutting them out. To get into really tiny areas, you might want to get a pair of detail scissors. To make this stamping easier, I'm going to use the MISTI tool, but you could also use a clear block or a stamp press. Again, I'm going to place my stamps approximately where I want them in the scene, and I'm going to pick up the ones that are going to be the topmost. These are your foreground images. I'm removing the hat for now, so I can stamp the package and line that up first, and then I'll line up the hat. Here I'm inking the stamps with some StazOn ink before I stamp. One of the advantages to using the MISTI tool is that you can restamp if it didn't come out as dark as you'd like. Although the ink does dry quickly, I decided to do a quick heat set before moving on. When you place the mask, make sure you can see a little bit of the black outline just outside the mask. This helps prevent any gaps. Now I'm going to line up my bird with the present. To do this, I'm going to use some recycled plastic packaging to assist. Basically what I'm going to do is stamp the bird and then get an idea where I'd like the hat. Currently both the cardstock and the plastic overlay are lined up in the bottom right corner. Now I'm going to shift the cardstock so that the present lines up perfectly between the bird's wings. I'm also going to move the magnets to the cardstock to hold it in place. This next part requires a little trial and error. First place the hat where you think it should go, and then stamp it. If you don't like the placement, just erase it with some alcohol, and then try again. Once you're satisfied with the placement, just remove the plastic and stamp on the cardstock. Once the ink is dried, put the mask in place, as you did the other masks. Once again, we're going to use the plastic packaging to line up the bird. Before stamping, I actually decided to move the bird and the cardstock so that I had a little more wiggle room. The bird is fixed in place relative to the plastic packaging, so I'm going to use that to line up my piece of cardstock underneath. Once I have it lined up, I'm going to place the magnets on the cardstock and stamp my bird. The next stamp will be the background, so I'm placing the mask on the bird. I'm using the same trick with the plastic packaging by first placing the stamp where I think it should be, and then stamping it on the plastic packaging, lining it up underneath, and then stamping it with VersaFine Toffee ink. I decided I wanted the background a little more towards the middle of the card, so I shifted the cardstock down before putting the magnets underneath. It's time for the real fun part to begin, coloring the images with Radiant Neon inks. For this you can use either the ink pads or the inkers. I just love the vibrant colors of these inks. I'm going to use Fantastics to do my coloring. If you take some care when removing the masks, you may save them to use on another project. To use the ink from the inkers, just apply a small amount on your craft mat. Clean Fantastics may be used directly on the ink pads. These pigment inks take a while to dry, so you have time to mix right on the cardstock. This helps when you're blending two colors for a beautiful seamless look. I blended the yellow and the orange for the beak, and now I'm going to add a little bit of shading in blue to the eyes. The pigment ink is somewhat opaque, so if you get a little bit too much on a line, just use a pointy tool such as a die pick to scrape some off. Don't worry about it too much though, because we'll go over some of the lines later, as you'll see. To get a thicker coat of ink, it helps to apply it in a dabbing motion. Here I'm going to blend from yellow to orange to coral. In some cases I'll actually mix the colors on the craft mat before blending them further on the cardstock. Since I already have colors on my Fantastics, I'm going to apply some of the color of the coral to my craft mat and pick it up from there. I finished the large bird's body with blue and green, and now I'm going to do the little bird in blue and purple. The Fantastics are easy to clean. I just run them under warm water and then squeeze them with a paper towel. Here I'm just using the fine tip to go over a couple places I missed. Cleanup of the craft mat is also easy. Just spray with some water and wipe with a paper towel. Since the pigment inks do take a while to dry, it's best to heat set them before continuing. Check out those beautiful colors. For my sentiment, I'm using this set from the Stamps of Life. I love how my little scene perfectly illustrates my sentiment in such a funny way. I lined up my sentiment stamps where I wanted them, but then I realized that I forgot to put the foam pad in that's required for stamping with clear stamps. It's not really a problem, I just had to take everything out and put the pad in and then replace everything before I could stamp. For my sentiment, I'm going to stamp it in VersaFine Onyx Black ink because it comes out so clear and sharp. I'm going to add some details and shading with Memento markers in London Fog and Tuxedo Black. These markers are dual tipped. I'm going to use the fine pointed tip to darken some of the lines that may have gotten covered with ink. I'm also going to draw a ground under the birds. If I get ink on the pen, I'm just going to draw off on some scrap paper. When I draw ground lines, I usually put in some little pebble details to make it look more realistic. The balloon string is supposed to look like it's kind of blowing in the air. I probably should have put a little quote mark around it, but I didn't. I'm using the brush tip on the London Fog marker to fill in the shadows. Here's the final image. I just trimmed it down and mounted it on some coral cardstock to match the ink. The video camera doesn't pick up how really bright these colors are, but you can see it here in this photo. For more information about this card, including the card sizes, please visit artbymdp.blogspot.com. And be sure to visit imaginecrafts.com for more inspiration and ideas.